hello, and welcome to Just Onside. Hope you're all well. Hope you had a good weekend. I certainly did. I was at Ellen Road. Excellent 2-0 victory. And you can sort of see that we discussed this podcast because we're color coordinated. So, OS, how was your weekend? How are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thank you so much. Yeah, the weekend went past all too briefly. I did have a cheeky look at the Leeds result at halftime. I saw you were leading, I think, at 1-0 at halftime, weren't you? So I was pleased for you. I'm probably pleased for everyone else, the fact that Leeds won, just in case you were about to cause some chaos down there in Yorkshire. But how was it? Good performance?
It was it was a championship game. It was a championship performance. I mean, we were much the better side. Uh, weren't clinical, which is the story of the season so far, and it got so nerve-wracking because when you've only got a one goal lead, and they did come into the game sort of 65, 70 minutes onwards, and they had a couple of opportunities. So it was very, very nerve-wracking, but we scored in a 95th minute, which sort of sealed the game. So nice little finish from Pirot, but it's wonderful. I think one of the good things about being at the ground is that you can live every single moment, and really, when you do score, uh, there's a sense of euphoria that you never get anywhere else because there's obviously a whole if you're at home. There's a load of Leeds supporters, so really it was fantastic, especially when we scored the second,
Yeah.
because that was game over. So it was wonderful, and it was a a deserved win. But again, we make it so hard for ourselves because we're just not clinical. But in the end, we won. And nice little international break, and then we're good to kick on again.
Yeah, a couple of points off. I think Sunderland and Sheffield United. Sheffield United winning the Steel City derby. But yeah, you're in good position, aren't you? I think there's a little bit of distance between yourselves and at least fifth or sixth. So like you said, solidifying playoff spots. Long way to go, actually.
Yeah, but in the Championship, it's not like the Premier League where maybe 4 or 5 points is difficult to get. In the Championship, you can be on a run of 6, 7, 8, 9 games on the bounce where you win, and it completely alters the whole dynamic of the league. So I'm disappointed with third. I'm on with high standards, especially in the Championship with Leeds United, but I'll take it. I'll take it for the time being. Right, enough about Leeds. Uh, and before we start our topic, I mean, let's start the show. We'll talk about Man City and where they're at now. But a bit of breaking news. There's a referee who's been caught on social media, or at least he's done a video. He's not been too complimentary about certain characters, especially Jurgen Klopp. So, what's your take on this? Because it's certainly doing the rounds on social media.
Yeah, I mean, look, the story that we refer out, we just wanted to cover it briefly because it's a breaking story. And before I discuss it, I mean, it's a story about David Coote, who refereed the Liverpool against Aston Villa game this weekend, uh, just in a video. And I'm just going to preface this by saying, Ayub, there's still a little bit of verification going on about whether or not this video is legitimate. So look, time will tell. We just wanted to discuss it because obviously it was doing the rounds right now. But so this is a story about David Coote, the referee, uh, speaking about Jurgen Klopp in a very disparaging way, um, calling him I won't say the word, but let's just say it was
Yeah, the C word.
the C word, specific curse word, let's just say, and being quite disparaging about the manager and also Liverpool in general during what seems to be an episode of where he's clearly under the influence. Again, I'm going to be very careful here because they are still verifying the legitimacy of the video. Supposedly, he's insistent that the video is not real, but again, it seems to be doing the rounds right now. What I would say is that if it is proven to be the case, if it is proven that this is what he said during, again, he seems to be somewhat under the influence, and it's a reference to, I think the video is supposedly taken from COVID times, and what have you. Yeah, I think the issue you have, again, if it's proven to be the case that you've, in my view, is it's more about the larger picture. It's not so much about David Coote and Liverpool specifically. He clearly feels in some way, in a certain type of way about Liverpool. At least he did for that particular episode and about that particular manager. I'd actually like to focus a little bit more on, I think, the larger picture. About officials, about sometimes the fact that many fans, at least some fans are like this anyway, but they feel quite aggrieved that certain referees are not giving them specific decisions. For example, I know a lot of Arsenal fans were disappointed, I think, when I think William Saliba was given a red card by the VAR, who was, again, supposedly a Liverpool fan. Again, I'm not somebody who buys into that too much because you want to think about the game as relatively pure. I mean, these are neutral observers or impartial uh, kind of custodians of the game in many ways, make ensuring that the game is played out in fairness, in accordance with the rules and all the rest of it. I think the great issue you have, and again, he's supposedly been suspended whilst they ratify whether this story is correct, whether the video is accurate. But I think the issue that the Premier League have is more around how they can better educate, let's say, referees. Obviously, look, stuff like this should never be getting out anyway. But I've always been of the opinion that this kind of thing does exist, mainly because ultimately you've got officials who've grown up. Most of them probably are football fans. They've ended up supporting our football team. Then you think about some of the, I guess, the vitriol and the abuse that they often suffer at the hands of players, at the hands of managers, at the hands of the crowd, and how perhaps the Premier League hasn't done enough to somehow bring those entities a little bit closer together. So what you then have is this natural divide and a misunderstanding between different parties. So certain feelings can fester, right? Certain emotions can. You would have to be somewhat of a saint if you've taken, let's say, dog's abuse for 97 minutes and then perhaps not feel a certain type of way. Remember, a lot of the times managers coming onto the pitch after the game, shaking hands with the officials, again, often giving them a lot of abuse. Players, it seems to be just quite normal actually for players often. Now, you remember a couple of years ago, there was a little bit more, let's say, focus given to it. If you swear at the referee, you'll be given a yellow card. Now only the captains can approach the referees and all the rest of it. My biggest issue has been more around what I would say, and I'll come back to the story just to summarize quickly, is my biggest issue is when you have an incident like if this video is proven to be the case, it can lead to a lot of misunderstandings and disillusionment, and you often get conspiracy theories and all the rest of it that will come to say, yeah, this decision, that decision. Already, there's some stories doing the rounds about last year Odegaard's handball at Anfield because David Coote was the referee and he didn't give it, or I think he was the fourth official and didn't refer it back to VAR or whatever. The point is that it's not just in a sense the impartiality of the game or the integrity of the game. It's that it has to be seen to be done as well. It's one of the reasons why they don't give officials from, let's say, Manchester certain games of Manchester United and what have you. I think one of the big mistakes that Premier League have made, if I may, just very quickly before I wrap up, is I think there's a clear understanding that the game's super fast, it's an incredibly athletic game, and sometimes referees are going to make mistakes. You're just not going to get them all right. We're trying to introduce VAR, perhaps next year semi-automated offsides. There's a lot of work being done technologically to try and get as many accurate decisions as possible. So I feel like we're trending, probably 10 years too late, but trending in the right direction. I think one thing I've always said would help is where referees come out after the game, not necessarily are interviewed with a way to be for a way to for them to become the stars or anything like this, but perhaps just explain certain decisions, perhaps even own up to certain decisions to say, look, I've watched this back, perhaps this is one I might have approached differently. Yes, I think the idea is VAR is supposed to intervene and kind of clear out all of those grey areas, but I think the fact that referees are not allowed to, let's say, humanize themselves and talk to the cameras, give interviews. And I don't mean again making themselves famous or really pushing their agenda out there, building their PR and their kind of public persona. I'm just talking honestly, just giving their thoughts as to what they saw and what have you. I think there would at least be a little less of a divide between the different stakeholders of the game, fans, owners. You remember last year, the Nottingham Forest chairman, when Nottingham Forest raised that official statement about, officials and all the rest of it, and they probably went a little bit overboard. But different stakeholders, there's a lot of emotion in the game. There's a lot riding on the games financially and emotionally. I do think the Premier League miss a trick when they don't think as to how they can humanize these referees, where fans perhaps would say, you know what, I can see it. I can see what you was thinking. Perhaps maybe the wrong decision. I think the challenge they've got right now is there's so many other areas this year. And I think this year, essentially, a lot of the officiating, some of the key decisions, I think they've got wrong. I don't think they've got it right in the way the rules were intended to be interpreted. Not least the whole delay of the game nonsense. But I think this David Coote episode, if it is proven to be the case, It probably sets the Premier League or the PGMOL back quite a number of years in terms of doing diligence about referees and referees being given certain games when perhaps they still harbor some resentment or a certain type of sentiment about a certain club. I think that really goes to the integrity of the game because you can consider whether or not if there's a 50-50 decision, it's just maybe perhaps human behavior or very common kind of human disposition to maybe perhaps say, well, he's been giving me dog's abuse for God knows how long. Am I really going to want to, give a decision his way? Again, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's sometimes very natural human behavior. So let's see. I don't want to comment too much in terms of the story itself. It may well be proven to be a fabricated video. So let's see, because there's some rumors doing the rounds. My comment is that if it is legitimate, I think it does set the PGMOL back quite a number of, not years, but what I mean is in terms of the work they have to do to showcase that these referees are impartial. There's a lot of work being done where they simply give what they see. I think too many times there's so many inconsistent interpretations and applications of the law. The fans are often left to themselves to think, oh, this referee's got it in for us. Again, very natural human behavior often with fans. But I think it is quite a serious topic, actually, if it is proven to be the case, because this has always been, let's say, thought about that this happens. And it's probably a natural consequence of being given abuse game in, game out, right, by officials and all the rest of it, by managers and all the rest of it. But I think it'll be interesting to see how the PGMOL takes it forward, if again the video is proven to be true.
I mean, my first point is, I mean, I'm not, whilst being aware of AI, I'm really not well versed in what it can do, what it can't do. But to me, it looks like a real video. If it is fake, my goodness me, it's frightening because I suppose the possibilities of what can happen in the future, because that, for all intents and purposes, to me, looks a legitimate video. My sort of concern is, I mean, this is something, I mean, it's a subject that we talk about so often, refereeing decisions. And I'm not going to comment too much on David Coote, but generally, as long as there's incompetence, uh, these conversations will continually happen about, oh, hang on, has he done it on purpose? Has he not done it on purpose? Key decisions. Really, I think I still think we're so far away from having competent refereeing. Once we have competent refereeing, as to how that happens, my view has always been you've got to try and introduce ex-pros, maybe fast track them because some of the decision is just it defies logic, defies belief. You're right, it's a fast-paced game. Decisions have to be made instantly, but somebody with an understanding of the game perhaps will probably be much more inclined to make the right decision. So I'm not going to comment. You've obviously explained and outlined exactly what your concerns are. For me, as I said, I'd be intrigued to find out if this is a fake. That frightens the life out of me because what's possible with AI is very dystopian. But in terms of refereeing overall, if we get refereeing right, if we've got good, competent referees, I think some of these arguments will just disappear. Right, that's my 4 cents worth on the piece. Right, let's talk about actual football. We talked about on Friday about Man City. Uh, they're having a rough run at the moment. What we didn't expect was another defeat. And by all accounts, the first half, Manchester City played reasonably well, but in the end, they lost a game, and that's, I think, what is it, 4 losses on the bounce, which is
In all
it's
competitions, yeah.
yeah, it's unprecedented, it's unheard of. So, what's your take on what's happening at Manchester City? Now, we talked about obviously losses of key or the injury of a key man, Rodri, but surely you can't just have a club which is reliant upon one man. So, what do you think? Where do you think Guardiola goes from here now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I laid out some ideas as to why perhaps there could be some struggles at Man City, and you're right, Ayub. It seems to be a combination of things, right? Injury or injuries, and they have been uh, beset with some rough injuries. They've also had a few issues, especially in critical positions, and that's always the key. I always feel like there's some positions where you're just going to find it more difficult to replace in terms of like for like or even offset some of the damage, right? So I think when you think about Rodri, again, he's just one best player in the world. You've then got Diaz Stones, obviously the young player had to play at the back. second game in a row. And De Bruyne, they've not had him for most of the season. Now, they've still got incredible players that can deal with that. I still think there's a lot of things tactically, perhaps, in terms of the way they are. There were some things on Saturday, Ayub, I thought that I've not seen from a Man City team for quite some time. And I watched the whole game from start to finish. And look, I thought in the first half, Man City were the best team. Brighton had their moments, but Man City were the better team. Moved the ball fairly well. There was a couple of good chances. Again, got the goal, and you think, right, okay, normal service is resumed. Typical Haaland goal to some extent, played through lots of power, shrugging off players, and then obviously bundling the ball in the second effort. But you think at that point, right, okay, start to dominate the game, and it's clear that teams at this juncture don't respect Man City perhaps in the same way that they have previously. And what I mean by that is, it sounds quite a strong statement that I'm just talking about in this particular moment. They seem vulnerable where teams are not necessarily losing heart, even when they go 1-0 down. You could think about Man City at times when they're in their absolute best, 1-0. You might as well switch off the telly and put something else on. Now it's a case of let's see. Even at 2-0, I would have probably still thought if Brighton could get one early. Who knows? In terms of recovering the result. The one thing I would say is Brighton deserve an immense amount of credit. I will go back to City shortly. I thought in the second half, the coach, I thought it's some incredible things. Brought on substitutions, Pedro and a few others, kept throwing different looks at Man City, but he got the players playing closer together, and it just gave them the ability to press consistently Man City and get certain out balls. So they were playing lots of straight balls into one of the strikers, pop off, and then from there they were building off. I thought in the first half they were way too perhaps way too passive. I thought in the second half they definitely got going. I thought they were the better team actually in the second half, creating lots of good opportunities. Some signs though, I mean, there were situations that Kyle Walker was giving up on. You normally see him motoring around. We know he's had a few off the field issues as well, but at the moment he seems, I wouldn't say a spent force. I don't think I'm going to go that far, but he definitely seems like he's on the wane or his
Mm.
form's seriously lacking in terms of his ability to cover yards. I mean, this was a given. This wasn't even in question in years gone by. He's been the premier right back of his generation. Right now, I thought Mitoma gave him a pretty good game. He's a tough winger, don't get me wrong, but there were situations where he gave up on. He was jogging back. Never see that from Kyle Walker. One of his best capabilities is his recovery runs. So Brighton just looked the better team in the second half, and I was surprised at Man City's inability to dominate even without Rodri, they still have very capable technical
Mm.
players. It just seemed as though they got overpowered a little bit by Brighton in terms of just being overwhelmed in that second half. You look at the goals that you, especially, I mean, the second goal was a thing of beauty in terms of the dynamic movement and the play. And I thought João Pedro had an incredible impact. He's a top player. They've missed him when he's been injured. But the first goal, I mean, it's the kind of defending that you see from teams that are scratching around for confidence. You've got people flying in, tackles, slide tackles, last ditch attempts, the ball bouncing around. It's one of them dirty type goals that he's lashed it in. Not a Man City type, let's say, goal that they would normally often concede. I think the number one issue that they have, I still think you might disagree with me. I think there is something when you've climbed the mountain time and time and time again, which they have, and they deserve the benefit of the doubt, even at this juncture where they are in the league, a number of points adrift from Liverpool. Yes, they've got to play one another in a couple of Premier League games. I still think there's a little bit of that kind of out and out hunger missing. You go back to that Champions League semi-final when you mentioned, you called it one of the best performances you've ever seen, but when they absolutely brushed aside Real Madrid at home 4-0 or whatever it was,
Yeah.
they hadn't won the Champions League at that point. It felt destiny. It was as though they weren't going to be denied. It's as though Real Madrid knew as well that this probably isn't our year.
Mm.
Man City absolutely killed them in that second leg. It was four, could have been eight in terms of the number of saves Courtois, I think, made on the day. Just feels a little bit of that. It has that kind of end of a cycle type feel about the team. De Bruyne came on, didn't have the greatest impact. He was getting brushed off the ball a few times. It wasn't as though the game's passed him by. Absolutely not. I'm not.
Mm.
I'm not going to be stupid. But it just felt as though I never felt straight away. Oh, here goes. You'll see Man City. They've probably got enough to get a draw. Who knows? They might nick a win. I actually thought no. I think Brighton could hold on here. To be honest with you. So I just think there's a little bit of that. I want to say hunger, but just that little bit of something that you need. That kind of out and out. Maybe perhaps something what Liverpool you see right now. It seems like they're searching for something. They're on the hunt for something. Maybe City, after everything that they've won, especially this manager who's won at the highest level consistently,
Mm,
I feel like sometimes it's easy just to give in to the fact that perhaps this isn't our year. There's too many players underperforming. There's one or two he's trying to bed in. Haaland's going through a little bit of tricky form. Yes, he scored, but in terms of his overall play, he's not dominating or scaring defenders perhaps as he once
mm,
was. And he'll get back to that. I'm sure he'll score a bucket load this
mm,
season. But they've got to get back and firing quickly, Ayub. Or as I mentioned on Friday, this could unravel in terms of this season pretty quickly. And look, Man City, people might say they've done it before, they won't be panicking. And yes, they won't be panicking. 5 points is they've come back from that before. But they've got a couple of big games coming up now, Ayub. And they better be careful now. You might say home to Spurs. Let's see after the Spurs result, which we'll come on to. But I do think there's something missing. I think teams fancy them now in terms of, oh, there's a vulnerability there. We're not out of the game, even if we go a goal down. I think coaches are preparing for that. And I think some of the coaches are now being able to kind of tactically, not necessarily outsmart them, I wouldn't go that far, but at least to compete with them. And that wasn't always the case. So I think there's a more level playing field, interestingly. And I think City have a lot of points to answer. Not necessarily in terms of their pedigree, because I think that has been answered. But each season you have to go and earn it. You don't win it on reputation alone. You've got to play the games, like I
mm.
always say. And right now, Man City do not look like a title-winning team to me.
I didn't think about that, but I think now that you've mentioned it, there could be a case in that in terms of they've probably got stale. I mean, Guardiola's been there a long, long time. Some of the players have been there a long, long time, and a lot of players or a number of the players probably are thinking about something else now. In terms of Kyle Walker, he's probably thinking, well, what do I do next? Uh, KDB, he certainly contemplated moving uh, away from Manchester City. I mean, it's is something that he's obviously thought about. It's been something that's been discussed. Uh, there was talk that he was probably going to move to Saudi Arabia. So maybe that sort of focus, that desire, that hunger isn't probably quite there. In terms of a coach, I'm not sure who said it, but somebody said that really, as a coach, if you've had a player for 4, 5, 6 years, in a sense, what are you coaching now? What Ferguson, I'm going to go to Ferguson now. What Ferguson always did, he kept on freshening the side up. So there'd always be a new injection of players, different ideas, different philosophies, and it kept things fresh. I don't know whether it's just got stale. You could be right that it's got stale, and in a sense, there's certain stagnation. Players perhaps are thinking about life after Man City, and really, if you're already thinking about that, maybe that desire, that commitment, that energy that you probably show, perhaps. And in the Premier League, it's about margins. You could drop 1%, and that percent is quite crucial, quite critical at the highest level of the game. So perhaps you're right. I mean, as I said, I never thought about it, but now that you've mentioned it, maybe that is perhaps one of the reasons why they're on the wane.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting you say it, you, but I think the way you've put it there in terms of the margins, like we sometimes think City are a class above, and they are, but that's because their performance is always so incredibly consistent over the years. You don't win what they've won without being incredibly consistent performance-wise.
Mm,
And often I think teams understood, like, okay, you go to Man City at Etihad, you're losing, just try and keep the goal difference a little bit down, or even if you somehow miraculously went a goal up, it was just a case of, City would always find a way. Only Liverpool
mm,
consistently have been able to at least compete with them, so to speak. And Spurs have got a decent record, I would say, against them as well, relatively speaking. But I think now, to your point, I think there's a few too many players in what I would say shaky form. Like Foden's not set the world alight. He's supposed to be PFA Player of the Year. Bernardo Silva's had mm, a kind of a tricky season. Haaland, for all of his amazing contributions, he has had games where he's not done much. And look, that was very similar to last year. Again, do I think he's going to be top scorer in the Premier League? I do, but that's just because Man City's probably still going to score bucket load. But in terms of just overall play, Grealish has obviously been injured. De Bruyne has been injured. Rodri's obviously got a long-term injury. They're missing two centre backs. Stones is a big player for them. I mean, he's got him a point against Arsenal. He's got him a winner
mm,
against Wolves. Don't underestimate his experience. And then you've got a few players perhaps out of form. The shape looks a little lopsided. You've got Guardiola, who's decent in terms of got some big goals, but you've got Kyle Walker underperforming. You've got a young kid at centre back as well. I just think teams feel as though they've got a chance, and that's always half the battle. Now, funny, just very quickly, you mentioned about the margins. Perhaps we don't necessarily consider this in previous years because, and my brother will laugh at this because he's always telling me Man City will win the league. But it's often the case that it's only been a few times, at least that I can remember, at least in recent memory, that they've won the league at a canter. Now, some might say because it's inevitable that Man City will win the league, it feels as though, oh yeah, this is what you expect. It's getting predictable. But each individual season of Europe has had its own story. I would argue Arsenal, well, they took them to the last game last season. Yes, the season before Arsenal came unstuck right at the very end. They've beaten Liverpool on a couple of occasions on the very last day, sometimes in dramatic fashion. So my point is that although they've won many titles under Pep, of course, no one's taking that away. And I think they've won three on the bounce. It's not as though they've walked the league, let's say, on many of these occasions. It's always been someone nipping at the heels, and to their credit, Man City's credit, immense credit, they've come through. You can't keep going to the well every single time and think, oh, we can defer a 5 point lead, 6 point lead, 8 point lead, and we'll come back. No, it doesn't always work that way. You're gonna every now and again, you're gonna probably give yourselves too much of a hurdle to overcome. And I always talk about performances, Ayub. If they were 5 points adrift of Liverpool, yeah, they'd been a bit unlucky. They'd got a red card, maybe a bad decision. I'd say, yeah, no issues. The fact is, they're not playing well. It's the same thing I always say to you about Arsenal. Fine, I can cope with what it is if I can see that over the course of a season, if they play enough games like this, they'll win more than they lose. Now, Man City will win more games than they lose because they've got world class players. But you can't tell me that a 4 game defeat streak, let's say, a 4 game loss streak, is nothing but a coincidence. They're not playing all that great, and teams feel as though they can compete with them. So I think what is in front of them right now is an important challenge, a very significant challenge. And some might say, well, it's not decisive because we're on this side of Christmas. I disagree. I disagree because the early pace setters are setting a great pace. And I don't think you can always keep going back to that well. So difficult moments, but they still have the opportunity to address those. And perhaps even at this stage, they still deserve a little bit of the benefit of the doubt.
I might just think, I mean, you sort of alluded to it, whether it has that sort of end of cycle feel to it. And maybe that is the case. Maybe it's run its course. Pep's been there a long, long time. Maybe he won't be manager next season, and maybe that just might be the fillip that the club needs. Slot towards the end of last season, it just seemed to fall apart for Liverpool. Slot coming in, there's a new injection, there's a vibrancy. Maybe that could be what Manchester City do next season, where they just think, well, look, he's been a wonderful, wonderful coach. We've had some wonderful memories. Maybe it is time for a change, and maybe it might be mutual. Maybe Pep might just say, well, look, I've done as much as I can do. I need a new challenge. I think the club probably need a new guy at the top, and maybe it's time to sort of depart. And I honestly, genuinely think this last month or so, it just seems like a completely different Manchester City. I think you've in my opinion, I think you've hit on something that I'd not thought of. But maybe now I am sort of thinking that perhaps it is time for a change. Now, obviously, they've got to go through the season, and they might end up winning the league.
Correct.
You're absolutely right. But I think maybe it could be that, right, this is the last season for Pep. I don't think we can sustain this with Pep anymore. And it goes back to that point, because if you are being coached by somebody for a length of time, there has to be a point in time where you think, well, look, there has to be a change. There has to be something new. Uh, Ferguson was different because he kept on bringing in new players, so he kept freshening things up. I think there's too many players that have been there a long, long time, and maybe they need a fresh voice, a new face. So it will be interesting to see how this season pans out, and maybe what they do next season then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just in summary, you're right. I mean, it shouldn't be the case that we're writing his obituary in any way, but I think he looks a little different on the sidelines. There's times when he's animated, there's times when he's forlorn, sat in his seat. And look, they're second in the table, 5 points adrift. No one's panicking. But I think there will be alarm bells at the performances because they don't look superior as they
Yeah.
often do. And I do think more and more that this will be his last season. And that's not to say that that's because they're slightly struggling right now. That's why nobody makes a decision in the emotion of it all when you've had such a connection with a football club. I just think you're right. It does feel as though, again, Liverpool perhaps parted ways with Jurgen Klopp at the right time, not a year too early, not a year too kind of late. And they're kind of feeling the benefits of that. It's not to say Slot's a better coach than Jurgen Klopp. Slot's got a long, long way to achieve half the things that Jurgen Klopp did in his time at Liverpool. But you're right in terms of a fresh voice, a new voice. Sometimes it's just you need a new voice to resonate with the players. The
Mm.
players get enthused about new methods, a new way of being. Also, the coach comes in hungry because he's got
Mm.
his own story to write. Let's say Jurgen Klopp obviously etched forever in the hearts of Liverpool fans, and the same can be said about Pep and Man City. It just feels as though right now, if you asked me, will you Pep Guardiola be coach next year for Manchester City? I'd probably say no. Probably mainly because they may get relegated after these charges and he's not coaching in the championship. But it just feels as though that's the case. I don't feel Man City right now have that edge of superiority over any of the big clubs. Or I shouldn't say any of the big clubs. I just don't see them having the same edge when I look at them in terms of their ability to dominate games. Maybe it'll come again, but right now they're still scratching for a lot of their performances.
Right. Well, City obviously are in a difficult period of time. A club that obviously is doing very well is Liverpool. But before we talk about Liverpool, I'm going to indulge you. Massive, massive game, Chelsea versus Arsenal. As an Arsenal fan, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought it was an unusual game. I thought it was going to be a very similar game when I started watching it, first 10, 15 minutes. I thought, well, I've seen this game before last week at Old Trafford United against Chelsea, an unusual game, just peters out. It felt like neither team was going to necessarily like kind of take the game by the horns. And it just felt as though there was a bit of a quality missing, to be fair, in the first half. I thought Chelsea perhaps started the game, but they did start the game very well. Arsenal were not want to say hanging on, but you felt, oh, let's just get through this period if they can. And then Arsenal slowly started to play a little bit of stuff. Had a great opportunity with Martinelli. Obviously, Gusto had the chance at the other end, but yeah, there wasn't a huge amount in it. I thought in the first half. I think from an Arsenal perspective, in the first half, I thought still very conservative, very pedestrian, very slow, very risk averse. And there was something that I read, which I thought kind of summarized the mood to some extent, which is sometimes Arsenal, they don't necessarily embrace the chaos, perhaps like a Liverpool would. And listen, there's more than one way to skin a cat. But I've always believed you have to take some semblance of risk if you want to win games of football consistently. You just need to have calculated risks. Perhaps that time will come for Arsenal. I thought second half they were much better. I thought by and large they were the better team, and I say by and large, I thought they had a bit more quality. And look, you could clearly see that Odegaard wasn't up to full speed. You wouldn't expect him to be. He's been out for six and a bit weeks. Very little training, very little game time at Inter. Played 4.5, 5 minutes, I think it was. And yet he was asked to play the entire game. And even in that type of scenario, where he comes back and plays the entire game, he produces the few moments that
Mm.
of quality that many thought he could. I mean, you've got him with the assist for the first goal, but even that bit at the end, we often speak about this. It's the poise, it's the ability to just gather, know that the right players touch, gather into Saliba's feet. I'm talking about the very last moment of the game. It's still little subtleties of quality that only the very best can put together. And I thought, because when he put that ball through for Saliba, I genuinely at that point thought, looking at the Arsenal overload, this surely has to result in a goal. Unfortunately, it didn't. I mean, I'm not sure if Saliba was offside. Honestly, he looks just on. I think it was Cucurella in the middle whose legs seemed to be trailing from what I could see. But a huge moment for Arsenal. But look, in the end, a great goal by Neto to equalize. Disappointing from Arsenal's perspective. They were recycling after a second phase of a corner where they didn't get themselves settled. Saliba ended up coming out to left back. Anyway, they were a little bit unsettled. Great little inside ball from Fernandez, and then Neto scores from distance. On the whole, look, I thought was draw fair result. I thought Arsenal shaded it. I really did. Just in terms of the quality, I thought Marino had a really good impact. I don't know if you thought the same when he came on. Lots of nice
Mm.
little
Yeah.
touches,
Yeah.
and then they started to play a little bit of stuff through the middle. I thought Partey, Odegaard, and Marino started to come through the middle. Trossard had a good positive impact. I do think his best position is still off the bench, making an impact half an hour. Yes, he'll be disappointed with the chance. I don't think it was as easy as people make out because it's coming across you. I'm not 99% sure Havertz would have tapped it in because the ball would have been perfect on his foot. Whereas with Trossard, he's got to let it come across him. It's a little bit more tricky. I don't think it's as easy as people make out. So yeah, disappointing at the end. I love the emotion of it, Arteta's reaction. That's what you want. It's last minute. It's the last embers of the game. I love that.
Mm,
I do love
yeah.
that type of passion in the game. I think that's what the moments are there for. Many might think draw was a fair result. Look, Arsenal lose more ground, but I think right now they need to think a little less about challenging for the title and simply focus on being a bit more consistent in their promotion, in their offense, in their attacking situations, getting back to keeping clean sheets, something they haven't done in well over a month now in Premier League football. So I think once they start to focus on those things, do I think they have the capability to get a run going, Ayub? I do. I still do. But yes, for sure, their margin for error is diminishing week by week. But they've had a tough run of away games, I would say. They've probably the defeat against Bournemouth will hurt, but they've had a tough run of games. Yes, they can't cut adrift right now, Ayub. But they need to show that they've got the mettle to go on a run after the international break and get themselves and hold themselves back into a Premier League title race. One that they're not currently present in, but I do think they've probably again earned the right to have a go in perhaps this middle third of the season to try and see if they can establish themselves and get themselves closer back to Liverpool. But by and large, perhaps a fair result, but had the opportunity at the very last kick of the game to pull out a win. And you can imagine just before I finish, if that goal goes in,
Mm,
pandemonium, crowd erupts in the away end. You've probably got Arteta running down the field into the just because it was an emotional
yeah, yeah,
moment, right?
yeah.
But unfortunately for them, it didn't go through. So, in the end, a draw, you take it because they were coming off the back of some poor results, but they've got to go and they've got to go big after the international break. So, time will tell.
All right, would have been a massive moment that. But just as an Arsenal fan, just before we finish, where do you think if there was a school report just before the international break, would you be must try harder, must work harder, or are you quite satisfied that given the circumstances, given the injuries of key personnel, that you're satisfied where they're at?
Yeah, I don't think you can be satisfied just because I don't think you can use injuries as an excuse. They've had a lot of issues. That's what I would say in terms of not just injuries, but a few self-inflicted wounds, a few kind of the rough end of a few decisions, I would say, in terms of, having a little bit of, let's say, smart refereeing go their way. I mean, even yesterday, I don't know if you agree, you, but Michael Ollie was refereeing the game. Do I think Havertz is being a little bit clever in terms of trying to delay things and trying to be on the pitch? But he's bleeding from his forehead. I don't think he deserved just to be yellow carded when he's got blood profusely coming down Terry Butcher style down his forehead. I mean, I just think be smart, but Michael Oliver there again, just happy to brandish yellows. You got to remember he got a bad cut against Inter Milan, so I have a feeling that this might have been a reopening of that particular wound because he had a lot of blood in the Inter Milan. But look, by and large, I don't think you can point to that and say, "Oh, that's satisfactory." The 9 points adrift, they'll have harbored hopes of pushing for the Premier League title because they've been in that race last couple of years. But as I always say, each individual game is played on its merits. You don't get anything from last season to this year. You start afresh, and Arsenal haven't done enough performance-wise to merit being in that conversation. What I would say though is they've got enough quality in that team, and I do believe with the coach as well, to ask questions now by going on a run if they can. A run that they're capable of, but it's going to require focus, it's going to require discipline, and it's going to require certain commitment in terms of being able to just churn out results. You know this. If they go on a bit of a run, for sure, they'll hold themselves back into it, but you've got to focus on each and every game and perhaps not shoot yourselves in the foot. Again, very little margin for error. I'd probably say it's a C minus so far in terms of season so far, but no excuses. Got to do better in the second half.
Okay, in keeping with school metaphors, top of the class Liverpool, another excellent performance. Uh, it's looking really, really good. I think, I mean, after I don't know how many games they've played this
11.
season, to have
11.
a 5 point lead, I think it's a 5 point lead. That's quite seismic. Uh, I'm, I mean, obviously, I always sort of big up Liverpool, so I'm certainly optimistic. I think this could be the season. I think Slot's been an absolute revelation. They're playing good football. He's been able to implement his ideas very, very quickly. And I've got to be honest, when I see Slot now on the bench, it just looks so natural. Considering the impact Klopp had and how long he was there, uh, I don't even think about Klopp, which just shows how wonderful uh, Slot has been. So Is it too early to say? Will they win the league?
Yeah, I'm keen to get your thoughts because I know you're a big Liverpool fan. I know you are.
In the closet.
In the closet. Listen, I agree with you in terms of. So I think he's hit the perfect balance in terms of having enough faith in his own abilities, not feeling like the job's too big for him. I actually think he's got a healthy, quiet arrogance about him in the way he speaks. Don't forget, again, it's a bit like what he did with Gerald Quansah in the first game against Ipswich. He's managed players well in terms of his rotation of midfield options, rotation at left back with Robertson and Simicas, rotation of Diaz and Gakpo. Now suddenly starting to get the best out of Nunes. Salah's coming on strong right now. I do want to call out Van Dijk. I think last season was an improvement from obviously the injury that he was recovering from. And there was some questioning, perhaps if he was ever going to get to that uh, kind of elite level centre back player where he was going to put himself with the pantheons of centre back greats. I didn't think he was quite there yet. And I'm talking your John Terry's, your Rio Ferdinand's, Vincent Kompany's, just to name a few. But he's playing at a level this season, Ayub, which is definitely back to his absolute best. He's at the he's at the kind of epicenter of, in a sense, digging out crosses. His positional play, in terms of defending crosses, certain situations, is back to his imperious best. I also want to call out his offensive play. He's always the one who's starting off attacks. His passes and speed of passes into midfield, his diagonals into Salah. He always makes good decisions. He was the one who set off Salah for the first goal. He just knows what to
Mm,
do.
yeah.
It's just play it into that channel. He'll do the rest. There's no delay, there's no indecision. He knows exactly what needs to be done. I genuinely think, in terms of ball playing defenders, you don't necessarily think about him as your quintessential ball playing defender, but he's about as good as it gets in terms of his ability to pop it left, pop it middle. And again, his speed of pass for me is quite, he normally tends to get the ball moving quickly into the right situations. I think he's the best centre back in the league on current form. I really do. And he's a joy to watch. But so there's a lot of good things happening. Slots come in. He's been very complimentary about Klopp in various different interviews. Obviously, Klopp gave him his song as well, so he often comments on that post game. So he's very deferential to what
Mm,
has been set before him. He often downplays how much difference he's actually made. He talks about how there's a lot of good habits that he's just simply followed on from Klopp. So he's very respectful and classy, if I may say. So I think he's connected with the fans by showing quite a bit of grace, not necessarily coming in and putting his entire stamp on things, but just like you would do, subtly changing certain things. There wasn't a whole deal wrong with Liverpool last year, you got to remember they were in the title race until game week 31, 32, if memory serves. It was just a certain, maybe perhaps discipline within the game, a certain kind of emotion that he wanted to take perhaps out of their performance at times. I mean, against Brighton and Villa, you just very quickly, I thought both games were similar in a lot of ways, which is Brighton dominated the first half. I thought Liverpool were better in the first half against Villa, but Villa still had lots of good opportunities, I would say, at least enough opportunities. But Liverpool just have this mental edge over teams where the teams know that Liverpool will always score. Now, yeah, you might say, well, they did it against Forest, but it's the belief that the team has, the opposition has, which is it's Liverpool. If it's at Anfield, they're definitely scoring. And even when we're on top, there's a certain kind of emphasis that we better score because Liverpool can have these moments where you think they're not playing so well. Oh, they're getting cut adrift. You remember against Bournemouth, something similar happened where Bournemouth started like a house on fire, had a goal disallowed, and you thought, oh, Bournemouth. And before you know it, crash bang, wallop, Liverpool have got the game in the bag. So Liverpool have so much confidence in their ability to score goals that they're happy to take certain risks within games. And I do like that. Like I said, they do embrace chaos better than any other team, probably in the last 10 years in the Premier League. And I just think Slots hit all the right notes in terms of the way his comments, into the way he's influenced the team, certain tactical shifts. He's getting the best out of Konate. Van Dijk's obviously incredible at the moment. Salah's coming on top. So when you look at everything, plus this is without Alisson over the last couple of games, although Keller has done incredibly well,
yeah.
he's doing all the right things. Now, again, they've got Southampton next and then Man City. For me, opportunity knocks in terms of these next couple of games. Beat Southampton, home against Man City. Let's see how Man City fare against Spurs, but huge, huge opportunity. I don't mind them being seen as favourites for the Premier League title. because perhaps that's still deserved. I think at this stage, I think some bookies have just put them as favourites. The others have Man City. It's fine. I think it's a pick 'em right now. How do you see it, Ayub? Or do you see that you just need to see a little bit more?
I think you've covered all the points really, really well. And it's interesting as well. I think you made the point as fans, or certainly some fans, and I'm part of that latter group where you 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 view what's happened recently uh, much more uh, much more strongly. And towards the end of the season, obviously it had fallen flat for Klopp. So in a sense, that is my abiding memory. But you're absolutely right. Up until about game week 31, they were doing fantastically well. What I like about Slot though is he's very unassuming. Uh, there are some coaches that come that it all becomes about them, or certainly there's lots of histrionics on the sideline which draws attention. This guy is very, very, very measured. Uh, I think what's worked also, again, it's conjecture. It's what I think. I mean, it's basing it on what I think has happened. But the players appear rejuvenated. They suddenly, I mean, it's we talked about it before with Guardiola that maybe hearing the same voice for years and years and years, perhaps subconsciously it might have an impact. You might just maybe just drop off. Uh, you're right about Virgil van Dijk. He's been outstanding. He's been an absolute colossus. There is a Dutch connection. He absolutely knows who Arne Slot is and the reputation that precedes him. Konate again is magnificent, but he was magnificent last season as well for large parts. So, but it just seems that this team has just they've reacted in the absolute right way. They've lost an iconic manager, but I think this guy comes in, and you're absolutely right. Sometimes don't fix something that ain't broke. And this guy's all he's done is right. At the end of the day, you're a very good team. He's just maybe tweaked one or two things. In a sense, it's business as usual, but it's just a fresh voice. They're playing some good stuff. They're playing very, at times, it is the chaos, but it seems wonderful to watch. But they seem just a little bit tighter. That chaos seems to be measured rather than unpredictable, which it may have been on the club. But I think he's done a wonderful job. Uh, he's 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 picking the right players. All the players seem to be performing. Uh, Obviously, he's in a slightly more fortuitous position where there's not a plethora of injuries to key players, but there is an injury to Jota, and Jota is a massive player for Liverpool, but he's just got on with the job. Nunes has come in. He's very unpredictable. He infuriates, I would say, lots of Liverpool fans because sometimes he'll do things that you just think, why? But he gives you everything, and he's performing at this moment in time. He's scoring a few goals here and there. So all things are looking really rosy. I'm quite confident. I think this is the year. This is the year that they'll win. I think there's a nice little gap. The key game obviously is going to be Man City. I mean, if they happen to win against Man City, I'm absolutely expecting that they'll turn Southampton over. So that's a guaranteed 3 points. So it should be that game against City will have huge ramifications. If they win that, uh, base it on the fact that City will win the next game. That will be what, 8 points? We're sort of 13 games into the season, so that's a huge gap so early on in the season.
Well,
So
yeah, if that's how it breaks down, they will be the bookies' favourites. I mean, that'll be the game, and it's normally those head-to-heads when the bookies change their kind of odds anyway, when there's some decisive factor. And look, it can go the other way, right? Man City will think as though, well, we're 5 points adrift, beat Spurs, and let's say Liverpool beat uh, um, Southampton, and then they can go to Anfield and beat. There's nothing I've seen at Anfield that suggests, or at least there's nothing I've seen in Liverpool that suggests it's an automatic Liverpool win. Equally, I've not seen enough from Man City to suggest Man City can win. All three results are possible. It should be quite a big, an important game, and you feel as though Liverpool just feel as though this is our opportunity. We get them the first game at home, not at the Etihad. We've got a little bit of a lead. Who knows if they beat Southampton, maybe Spurs can get a draw at City or what have you. But let's see. Let's say they both win. It just, I always feel as though you've got that opportunity. You've got that opportunity at home. It'd be interesting to see if Liverpool can take advantage of it. Like I said, they're playing a certain type of football where they still concede opportunities, and if they concede similar opportunities to Man City, you'd expect Man City to score. But against that Man City team right now, I'd be amazed if Liverpool didn't score. They just will find a way to get a goal. So yeah, let's see. It's 3 weeks away actually after the international break, but uh, Liverpool incredible form, incredible consistency, great defensive record, well deserved. Best team in the league so far, and it's not close right now.
It's going to be a mouthwater inside the City game, but that's a few weeks away. But before we wrap up, there's a team that we want to talk about, which is it's Spurs. I mean, this is a team which just you never quite know exactly where they're going. They've got a new coach who's been there for a year and a bit now, uh, but it seems to be that the club is just sort of drifting again. So uh, I'd like to know your thoughts on that. Obviously, you're an Arsenal man, so there's a slight amount of enjoyment probably. But what's your take so far? What is happening? I mean, they had a very disappointing. In fact, I would go as far as saying the most disappointing result of the season thus far against Ipswich, which is a team that's well, I say going to be relegated, but you never quite know. But I would sort of say if I'm a betting man, which I'm not, I'd put Ipswich as favourites to go down, or one of the favourites to go down. So to be beaten by Ipswich at home is a bitterly disappointing result for Spurs, and maybe it's a reflection of the type of season they've had. So where do you think they're going?
Yeah, it's look, I think from a Spurs perspective, I mean it is probably the shock result of the season so far in a lot of ways, just because A, they're at home and they're going up against a team that's fancied to get relegated, right? It was Ipswich's first win of the season, which will make it very disappointing for Spurs fans. You knew that Chelsea and Arsenal were playing one another afterwards, so you knew one of them were going to drop points. Obviously, it transpires that both of them did. Look, they're 3 points behind Chelsea, I believe. I think Spurs are still on 16 points with a better goal difference. They've got the second best goal difference in the league, I believe, after Liverpool still, which meant that if they'd won the game, they'd have been level on points with Chelsea, which is obviously a huge. Again, they're still a way away from Liverpool. I don't think anybody's suggesting Spurs have it in them to challenge for the Premier League title, although when early on they were had a few big results, not least away at Old Trafford when they absolutely brushed aside United, even aside for the fact United played the second half with 10 men. But they were much the better team against Man United. And it felt as though Postecoglou had kind of turned the corner at Spurs, especially this season. So I think, look, it's a disappointing result just because it's home against a team that's again you fancy to be at the bottom of the table for a period of time this year. But Ipswich were probably well worth it, to be honest with you, in terms of result. Yeah, I mean, possession was in Spurs' favour, I think 66% or so. But when you look at the game, you look at the way Ipswich attacked, Spurs always still defensively, you do not give me the impression that they necessarily enjoy defending, let's say. I mean, you look at that second goal, even the first goal, you'd expect kind of Brennan Johnson just to put his head in there, and he kind of just hesitates a little bit. Smartix, who you know is obviously a great championship. I think he was top
Mm.
scorer in the championship last year. You tell me if I'm
I think it,
mistaken.
yes, he was. Yes, he was.
For good old Blackburn Rovers, but I mean, a great little kind of bicycle overhead kick. But you still, Brennan Johnson hesitates. It's not quite where you need to be. If you want to compete at the highest level, you've got to put your head there. All the rest of it, and even the second goal, that overlapping run, they stop running, they stop tracking because they just think, is he really going to make that run there? Oh, he has made that run. Let me. It's all reactionary. So it was a bit of a sloppy goal. I think Ipswich were, in the end, probably deserving of it. Yes, the Spurs had lots of moments, goals allowed, and all the rest of it. But it's a very, as you would say, bitterly disappointing defeat. Are you just because it's at home? You've got to be winning these games. These are not the games. I mean, you can even forgive Liverpool because Forest, up until yesterday, have been riding high. So maybe Forest will finish, let's say, top table or top half of the table and what have you this year.
They won't.
Let's see.
They won't.
Let's see. They've got a good coach. But look, in the end, what I'm saying is that when you look at this game for Spurs, you've got to be winning these games. If you've got any hopes in terms of challenging for top four, look, they're only a few points adrift. I don't think the way the season's panned out, they won't give
Mm.
up just yet. But it's worrying in terms of their vulnerability at set pieces. Obviously, that's been little bit, quite a big thing in Ange Postecoglou's tenure. Do I think that he's got 100% approval rating like perhaps some of the other managers have? I don't think so. I think some of that is dissipating, perhaps unfairly. I think he still needs to be given time and a little bit of money to spend to turn this around. But uh, there's still clearly something that team's missing, whether it's certain midfield steel. They perhaps do at times play quite the offensive style. I think now he's got Bentancur back. I think he's trying to stabilize that somewhat, but still, in terms of at the back, not enough of a premium on clean sheets and focusing on that side of things. There's a lot of things I still think that are missing at Spurs, not least the things certain characters within the team and certain mentality that you only get over time. Now, I think for now he's fine, no issues. I don't think that's even a question mark. But I think they were booed off the field. I think at the full time whistle. I think they'll probably see this season as an opportunity with perhaps Arsenal not as strong, even Man City perhaps not as strong, to say there's no reason why we can't push forward and at least solidify top four. I think they're zero point 0.3 points per game worse off at this stage than they were last year. And last year, I think they finished sixth. So, look, time will tell. I think they've got time to turn this around. It doesn't get any easier. They go into Man City next against, you would imagine, a wounded Man City. You'd expect Man City to perhaps give them their best, although again Spurs have acquitted themselves well. So maybe perhaps this is the perfect game, actually, maybe that Spurs need right now. But yeah, a hugely disappointing defeat. And you know how us fans think. You think, right, get the win against Ipswich, and who knows, maybe we get a draw at City. Now you lose against Ipswich, you put such a lot of pressure
Yeah.
on the Man City game in terms of not wanting back-to-back defeats. So I think there are some question marks in terms of them slowly starting to solidify a certain style. They're still a good team going forward, but they're always finding ways to concede goals. And if that doesn't change, they obviously can't be taken seriously as potentially, which is what Spurs fans want, Premier League title challenges.
I think the key is the Spurs fans. I mean, I've got a few friends who support Spurs. I mean, I've got one very good friend that I've had for a long, long time. He's a hardcore Spurs fan, and he's forever complaining and mourning. He's not really seen any significant improvement, and he almost sort of thinks the club's going backwards because the recruitment again. He's always been critical of the recruitment, and Archie Gray. I mean, just this is just one of maybe a number of players that have been recruited now. Sometimes what you have to do as a club, if especially if you're a club that's really not won anything, you've got to think about the here and now. If you're a great club, big club with lots of pots, maybe you can buy players for the future as well because you've got that you've got that credit in the bank. Spurs need to be thinking about the here and now. They've bought Archie Gray for 40 million. He's hardly got any game time. I think what my friend was saying was they're contemplating sending him out on loan, albeit to a Premier League club. So that could be good. But again, it's when you're a team like Spurs, every signing you make, you must really be thinking about, right, is this player going to add now, not in 2 years' time? And I think this is where there's a lot of criticism of David Levy. And I've always said about David Levy, he's a businessman. That's it. He's a
Daniel Levy.
businessman.
Daniel Levy.
Yeah, yeah. What did I say?
Daniel David.
All right. Well, that's his brother. He's the same. Daniel Levy. He's a businessman first and foremost. And I said to my friend actually that in terms of Spurs as a business, they're doing really well. And that is the problem. When you've got a guy that perhaps, I mean, I'm sure he obviously has some sort of interest in the success of the club, but if you've got somebody who's absolutely prerequisite is business, 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 and making profit, this club hasn't won anything. I don't think it's won anything for a long, long time. But I think in terms of match day incomes, I don't think there's many clubs that match them in terms of revenue that they accrue. It's one of the best. They obviously hire their grounds out for major sporting events and major events. So as a business, they're doing fantastically well, and that's the problem. I think they have got a chairman who is preoccupied with Tottenham Hotspurs being a business, solely a business. And I don't think he gives a damn too much about immediate success. As long as the account's in black, he's happy. Whereas obviously fans, they want to see pots.
Yeah, I think, look, no, I don't disagree with you in terms of Daniel Levy. I mean, look, in terms of his focus, what he's been at the club, I don't think he's got a huge amount of, like, let's say, high fan rate, fan approval, and all the rest of it. But and I'm with you. Look, they are a well-run business in terms of match day income and some of the other affiliations that they have, not least with the NFL and all the rest of it. It's an incredible world-class stadium. But to your point, ultimately, it's about the product on the pitch. And I think the product on the pitch, to be fair, is improving. Perhaps not in quite the large increments that Spurs fans would want. I think the difficulty for Spurs fans is it's a little bit of a difficult one because after they sold Harry Kane, you think, oh, it's going to be a difficult few years. But they probably had a very steady season without him, perhaps to the surprise of many. And then obviously this year they've had an indifferent type of start. And again, they're still only a few points behind Chelsea, and I'm not saying that should be the height of their ambition. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think there's still some good there. But what you'd like to see with Spurs, in a sense, to be built over time, is a very clear, consistent way of playing. And they're a very, relatively speaking, attractive team to watch, a fun team to watch. But what makes them fun also is that, to your point, they often find ways to concede. They've not perhaps got those absolute die-hard defenders that you need. Like now, Van der Ven and Romero is about as good as it gets. Van der Ven was missing yesterday, and it was a huge miss, no doubt, absolutely. But at home to Ipswich, you've still got to find a way, right? And I just wonder whether or not, in a sense, the fullbacks are they too is it too offensive? Let's say. You think Spurs have got a lot of great offensive players: Kulusevski, Madison, Son, Bentancur scored yesterday. He's more kind of all rounder. Werner's hit and miss, but in terms of Solanke, he's done well since he's come. And then obviously Johnson's had a good start, at least kind of going through peaks and troughs with scoring. I do just think they just need a little bit of experience and a little bit of that kind of somebody who's going to improve the mentality within that team. They look like a team that plays nice stuff, but you question when when things get really difficult, can they kind of stick it out? Can they keep a clean sheet when they're on the pump? Huge test next against Man City, a team that, again, relatively speaking to everybody else, they've fared okay against historically. So it's not a case of if the result is a foregone conclusion, but yeah, I think there will be a few more questions for Ange Postecoglou to answer over time. He's perhaps not got the equity, let's say, that an Arteta has now. He's not spent the money Arteta has. So I don't want to just simply compare it to Arteta. But the reason why Arteta's got at least for me, inbuilt equity is because he has gone close with the Premier League title twice. Now you might say that doesn't give you anything. No, it does. It tells you that he's willing to
Yeah.
stick it out and be right in there in amongst the conversation that Spurs want to be in consistently now and should be given time, should be given money to spend. I don't think you need to make any drastic decisions. The worry you would have with the Daniel Levy, to your point, Ayub, is a situation where Spurs might have another so-so type season and he thinks, yeah, time to pull the trigger again. It's that kind of decision making where there might be a disconnect between the coach and who's a nice fella, but you feel like he could come across a little bit abrasive at times as well. He won't want to be left out there hung to dry, being challenged by all quarters about where Spurs should be going when he is not being given the support, at least in the market, that perhaps Spurs deserve. So I think it needs a lot more investment. I still think they need a few, what I would call big time players, at least a couple, maybe perhaps in the middle of the park. And also maybe one at the back end, maybe the fullback position, just in terms of actual steel, somebody who wants to keep a clean sheet. So yeah, time will tell, but difficult result, and I don't disagree with it. Probably is the result of the season so far.
I mean, it's a surprise because you'd almost sort of think that Spurs are probably one of the most attractive clubs for players to come to. It's London. It's arguably one of the best stadiums in the world. Uh, it's renowned for attractive football. So it's ticking all the boxes. And I don't know. I mean, I think going back to the fans, I mean, they've got a great deal of animosity towards Daniel Levy. But I've absolutely no idea what his vision is. I mean, as I said, I always say that I think he's so consumed with it being a successful business that he's almost maybe turning well, it's not, I wouldn't say turning a blind eye to what's happening on the pitch, but certainly not focusing as much because for me, I go again, I'll say it again, as long as the business is in the black, he'll be more than happy. And I think this is probably one of in a perverse sort of way, this is probably what's holding Spurs back. They have invested. I won't sort of say they've not invested. They've certainly bought players, but I think the question mark is the type of players that they're buying. As I said, I mean, I use Archie Gray, but again, from a business point of view, it's a wonderful investment. He's a young player. Uh, if they sell him now, they'll sell him for more than what they bought him for.
Oh, they're not going to sell him, are they?
No, but what I'm saying is that in a sense, if you buy a young player, it's I see him as a future England captain. I genuinely see him as a
Hey,
future
what?
England captain. He will be. Mark my words. I'm not sure if you're a betting man, but I would put a few quid on him being a future England captain.
I don't think it's allowed here in the United Arab Emirates. But go on.
So that is one where again it's the I said it before. They should be buying players for the here and now, players that are going to improve the side immediately. But as long as Daniel Levy's there, I'm not sure what the focus is.
Yeah, and I think just one final point I would say is, I mean, they've scored the goal yesterday, and it's at that point, and Spurs have actually in recent times under Ange been known to have some great comebacks. I remember the famous comeback. Don't know if it was Ange. I think it could have been. I think it might have been before then. But even still, they've shown that they can get big results, recovery results, win games from different situations. And you just wonder at home, Bentancur scores from the corner, poor marking from Ipswich, and you think at that point they've got enough to win this game. Actually, in terms of
Yeah.
time, the draw felt foregone. Let's not forget Ipswich have also been on the back end of some rough comebacks themselves in the Premier League. So you just felt as though, right, inevitable Spurs get a leveler. Do they have enough time to win this game? And you thought, actually, yeah, they do. Actually, there's plenty of time. So it's a sign of the times that it was just you felt they're going to pour it on. They're going to pour it on, and they weren't quite able to pour it on. I mean, in terms of chance after chance, they've shown that they can achieve big results even when perhaps not playing their best. You'd have thought rescue a draw, surely. You had ample time to find a win. Credit to Ipswich. Again, happy for the coach. He's thought of, well, incredibly highly. I think there was a statistic. Is it their first Premier League win since 1992? I don't want to butcher that, but there was some stat or something.
Well, they've not played in the Premier League for about 25 years.
Yeah,
So,
but it just goes somewhere like that, right? So it just goes to
yeah.
show. Anyway, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but the point is, huge win for Ipswich, no doubt about it. Um, they've obviously still got a lot of work to do in terms of making themselves competitive and get up the Premier League. But yeah, from a Spurs perspective, a huge blow, especially with going to the Etihad next as well.
Right. Certainly indifferent at the moment, Spurs. But right, we've covered all the subjects that we wanted to cover, so I think we'll call it a day. It's Monday evening. It's dark. It's cold here. It's pretty warm, I presume. There. What's the temperature now there, anyway?
It's quite cool actually. Now very pleasant in the evening. I would actually go as far as to say it's cool. It never gets cold, but it's quite cool in the evenings. In the morning, it's relatively warm, but even then, it's not as it never gets too hot. Let's say now, I think we're past that. I think definitely now as we approach the winter, it's very manageable. But again, when I say winter, it's all relative.
It's all relative. It's all relative.
It's all
Yeah.
relative. I'm
you-
not wearing any jumpers just yet. Let's just say.
Yeah, I've got the old turtleneck on. I'll probably have a scarf on in a couple of weeks as well. All right, okay. As always, a pleasure, my friend.
Likewise.
Good to speak to you. It is the international break, but we'll be recording, so we'll be shooting again, God willing, on Friday. All right, so until then, catch you soon. See you later.